All right, good evening, everybody. I realize that I'm the person standing between you and drinks and dinner. So I'm going to try to keep it a little, energetic the way I can. Um, and just really happy to be here. And thank you, Upeka and Vibe team for inviting me here. So can I have a quick show of hands? How many of you are startup founders relatively early? Okay. And should I assume the rest of you are all like stuck in the mud dinosaurs from large companies? Yes? Raise your hand if you are. There are some bold people here, so I have to take back my words. So I have spent most of my life in entrepreneurship, both as an entrepreneur and then teaching entrepreneurship for a while. And the world is changing very fast. And Prasanna was talking about speed. So I thought, let me do the contrarian thing and talk a little bit about why not to get carried away by speed so much. In fact, when everything is moving faster, in some ways we have to design for endurance even more. So that's kind of the thing that I have set myself as a task, but also something that I've been working on the last 10 years, really looking at how relationships happen in the early stage and then through growth, and especially this idea of relationships happening between startups and corporates or larger organizations or even government in some ways. So it was really nice to listen to Ashwini and Aditya Agarwal, and I was really thinking it's crazy how we have stereotypes of how B2B partnerships work, and there is very little transparency on understanding how, IBM walks into Bill Gates' office and then, the entire fate of the company turns around because now they build something for this large corporation who doesn't ask them for exclusive rights to the product, right? So there's not that much. And it is still early stages to look at how some of these things actually happen, but also how they get structured. So let's go. I have only a certain amount of time, so I have to do my professor thing, give you a framework. So let's start with the oldest and the strongest and the most successful framework in the world, which is the scientific method. And I'm going to grossly oversimplify it, but I'm assuming all of you are technically trained in one way or the other, so you understand what the scientific method is, right? So at the bottom of the scientific method, irrespective of what your philosophy is, there is this idea that prediction leads to control, right? So prediction and control are so closely related that the difference or the connection between them is a mere vanishing point. And as human beings, for the most part, most of us want control over our lives, our outcomes, and maybe over the universe in some ways. So this is a very powerful idea. And when I started studying very experienced entrepreneurs several years ago, one of the interesting findings was the entrepreneurs are learning a different relationship between prediction and control. What they do is they take this vanishing point and they learn through their experience that it is a space. You can pull prediction and control apart, in which case it gives us a nice 2x2, which all of us, especially teaching in business schools, really love. But also, it makes sense in some ways because my training is as a cognitive scientist, and the brain can process only so much information at a time, irrespective of all the stuff that AI can do for us. And so a 2x2 is a way we navigate complex ideas, and then sometimes we'll play with it and add another dimension and things like that. But beyond that, it's very difficult to do it with brain alone. So the two dimensions you can think of as prediction and control, but it's also refocuses your attention. Whether you're a larger corporation or whether you're a startup, you have to understand that both of these things matter, resources and relationships. So when you focus on trying to predict better, you are focusing very much on resources, because lack of resources are the only reason you cannot place a bet based on your prediction, right? But if you're not going to predict, what does it mean to put control on the horizontal axis? Here what happens is you can think about control itself as a strategy without prediction. And if you do that, the only way you're going to be able to do that is through relationships. And that's where we are going to come to partnerships very quickly. But the 2x2 gives us nice 4 quadrants. The top one, which is high in prediction and low in control, we call causal. It's basically the standard model of decision making that dominates a lot of corporate strategy even today. Although I have colleagues who claim it's gone beyond that, but we'll see about that. And then the lower one is what everybody talks about today, because everything changes so fast. You can neither predict nor control, so you have to be nimble and agile, and there are lots of different words you can use there. But our dream as entrepreneurs is to be visionaries, right? My students always would say, you know, all of this thing you're telling me about the bottom right quadrant, which is the effectual quadrant, and some of you might know I spent a lot of time developing content in that bottom right quadrant. But my students always say, but Steve Jobs would never do that, right? He would be the visionary, high in prediction and high in control. And you will see that that is actually not true. But my students did come up with a name for this framework, the CAVE framework, and I have embraced it after some initial resistance. Anybody who came up with the name effectuation for her theory really doesn't know how to come up with cool names, right? So I accepted my students' name of this as the CAVE framework. So I'm still going to very quickly cover the basics of effectuation a little bit later, but let's explore the 2x2 just a little bit more. So let's look at this and think about what is a simple way to understand it. I gave you the causal, adaptive, visionary, effectual, but you can turn it into simple action tropes, right? The causal is really all about predicting and planning. And the adaptive is about the pivoting that you hear a lot about from the lean startup folks. And then the standard model of the pit bull entrepreneur is the idea of persistence. But this persistence is also something you can find in larger companies, and that's what makes it difficult for them to change. And the effectual, the focus is going to be on partnering, and I'll hopefully open the doors to something on that front. So if you go into any large company and you can look at decision making, whether it's in marketing or finance, hiring, strategy, any one of the departments, what happens is there is this idea that the better we can predict, the better we can our outcomes will look like. And so they start with this idea of prediction. But then, you live in a world of change, and many of you in this room are the culprits, right? People, startups, not just AI startups, all kinds of startups tend to disrupt the market. And sometimes some large corporations also end up disrupting the market. So if something goes wrong, what do? So you basically have three kinds of choices. You can continue to persist. You can just fix whatever the problem was that came your way and continue on your path towards the goals that you set. Or you can change. You can try something new. You can try different ways to achieve the same goal. And you can, of course, also quit and do something completely different with your life. You don't have to continue on the path at all. So adaptive is a very flexible quadrant where there are all kinds of things, including quitting, that happens. But then you can also effectuate. And what does this mean? This means that you are actually going to work with other people to shape, influence, and transform everything, including the marketplace. And when I first talk about it, with entrepreneurs, they're excited to try it and do it. When you give the same talk to people in corporations, they are naturally and reasonably much more skeptical. As I was saying, only recently, I think like 3 or 4 years ago, there was a paper published in the Strategic Management Journal on shaping strategies. But people have been doing it in practice for a long time. And sometimes it can be done in a very nice way, but it can also be done in very nefarious ways when you are influencing, policy in the wrong way in different countries and so on. So the idea of shaping and influencing is something that entrepreneurs learn the hard way through their experiences. But this requires things like, that you have to be open to uncertainty. The truth of the matter is we have no choice. And as the world progresses and there are more technologies, all of us are forced to be open to uncertainty, right? Hunkering down somewhere where no change is going to ever happen is less and less of an option as the world progresses. It's not only technological progress, but just education of many more people wanting more freedoms, choices. There are changes coming from multiple directions at us. So the fact is you have to be open to uncertainty in all four quadrants, but especially the top two give you this illusion that you can escape it for, enough period of time, if you will. And somehow you can predict and place bets in such a way that the uncertainty doesn't matter. And I think all of us in this, I don't have to make a strong case here, all of us in the room are here because we want to understand more about how to live and thrive under uncertainty. But both from an entrepreneur's perspective and from a corporate perspective, the second bullet point is very important and a hard one, which is to be able to invite others in. And I was listening to Aditya Agarwal talk about, I can't trust you. You startups who come knocking on my door, you may mean well, you may actually be competent, but I cannot see your P&L. So there is this resistance in some way to inviting people in, but we have to get creative on that front, right? We have to think about, can we build pathways that actually work without having to predict whether the relationship is going to be great down the road or not. That's the non-predictive part. So how do we do that? And the principles of effectuation are very useful on that front. But the most important thing you have to think about is not to hold on to everything you own, especially your goals, so strongly that you just miss the boat. And Clayton Christensen's work on Innovator's Dilemma shows that happens a lot in large companies, right? Because they're doing the right thing, they're listening to their customers, and the customers are saying, today I don't want that. And then tomorrow they go out and buy that thing that some engineer from this company went out and created, right? And so this idea that you have to be open in a way that you build corridors of trust, and both sides have to do that. But also, in building those, maybe you want to be open to even rethinking whatever you set as your goals. It doesn't mean, it's not an either-or situation. It doesn't mean that you have to give up on a strong goal if you have one, but you really have to be very aware that not changing the goal, you're actually handicapping yourself in some way, because there's a whole set of tools and whole set of strategies that you're not looking at by not being willing to do that. So let me keep going here a little bit. If you want to look at how this is useful and how can I use it, almost every tool and technique that you learn or that you hear from experienced people, what has worked for them, the academic tools, all of them actually can fit into this space in a very interesting way. And that is why I want you to think about this not as a space you navigate, but as a set of tools, and the framework, the 2 dimensions are telling you which tools might be useful when. So I'm going to quickly run through some tools, and you can come to your own conclusions on what belongs where. So here are some standard tools, right? Let's start at the bottom left, where you're kind of a rookie, you don't know what the heck you're doing or what should be done or anything like that. So a lot of people say this is what entrepreneurs are good at, trial and error, right? But we know that there's a little bit more going on there. And the lean startup methodology has brought the idea that you seek information, feedback, especially customer interviews. Maybe you do even deeper ethnographic interviews, that kind of thing. And then that leads to understanding value chains, constructing them, deconstructing them, creating a business model canvas. Or you can even go the more traditional way, do some business planning to raise money that leads to pitches. And in honor of Simon here, I put the Wadley maps in there. You can quarrel with me whether they belong there or not. And that's our plan for the evening. And there are many other things. And when we teach entrepreneurship, we teach a lot about pitching, and we say you have to be passionate, persistent, persuasive, all that kind of thing. Kind of the Steve Jobs shadow hangs there. More recently, people look at design thinking, especially in product development, and I can keep going. This is just for you to see that tools can fit. So you may think for a minute, why do all these tools fit into this framework? Because if you stop for a moment and think just philosophically, literally all of human life happens within this framework in one way or the other, right? I was just reading Juraya Pearl's work on causality, and he was talking about training AI, and he has this ladder model where he talks about the first thing is just finding patterns in data. The second level is finding causal connections. So you're not just observing and asking what are the patterns. You're saying, if I intervene, and do something, if I change X, what happens to Y? That kind of knowledge. And he claims AI has not even gotten to the second level. And then the third level of intelligence is counterfactual. What if I had done something different than I actually did? What if something had happened differently than it actually did? And that's where the imagination comes in. And imagination gets enhanced even more in conversation, especially conversations with people who might not see things the same way, right? So variation in human motivation and human understanding becomes like a useful ingredient when you bring it into this counterfactual analysis, which is the third level of intelligence. Clearly, some of you are going to break through the two other levels and prove Juraya Pearl wrong. I have no doubt about that. But in the meanwhile, I think we have to work on what is our greatest strength, which is this idea of being able to imagine worlds that don't exist, and maybe couldn't exist is how you yourself start with it. But you can still make that happen if you just go out and talk to other people, and some other people want to really commit to that. And remember, the rest of the world is predicting that you're wasting your time and it's all nonsense. And at the same time, to the extent that you can actually end up doing things in the world based on this idea of counterfactual or effectual thinking, then the world changes, right? This entire space now morphs into something else. So the space itself can change depending on what you actually do with other people. And that's really the heart of effectuation. So I have 2 slides where I'm going to summarize something that I've been talking about for 25 years. So those of you who have had me do it, just please be patient with me. The next drink is on me for your patience. But if you have never heard of it, boy, you're in for a treat, right? So there are 5 principles of effectuation. And as I said, I'm going to walk through them very quickly. There are lots of resources if you want to look them up in more depth, starting with the founders of Upeka here. Okay, apparently the pictures don't show up, so that's not going to be cool. So the first principle is you get into means-driven thinking. So you're always dividing the world into what's within our control, what's not within our control. And you only work with things within your control, and you say, what can we do with what we currently have? So it's not starting with a goal. You may or may not have a goal. Maybe you have a large aspiration. Doesn't matter. It's means-driven thinking. And when you use your means to come up with things that you can do you figure out which one to do? The standard model says you want to know, is the market big enough? Is the niche lonely enough? Is my expected return going to be high? And you choose based on that. Clearly, you don't do that in effectuation. You look at what can I live with on the downside? What is my affordable loss? And you invest no more than what you can afford to lose. And then comes the most important thing, which is the crazy quilt principle, which is all about partnerships. It's saying, get ready, be open to work with whoever wants to work with you. But there is a condition. You're not just going to ask them advice and just go with anyone who knocks on the door. Their commitment to the thing that the 2 of you will do together has to be large enough to make the next step affordable loss. Otherwise, you're not doing it. So there are some good ideas connected with partnering there. And along the way, of course, all kinds of unexpected things outside your control will still hit you. So if you can develop some ways to turn lemons into lemonade, that's of some use. But overall, the idea here is to understand that things that seem outside your control, the space, the environment, the future, a lot of it actually comes from things that people do, people want to do, choices people make, sometimes unintended consequences based on the choices they made as well. But the idea of human choice and interaction is at the heart of this process. All right. Given that my pictures are not going to show up, I have no idea what's going on. Okay, at least here you can see this. So it's the same 5 principles. Let's see it in motion so that you can see why is it that very experienced entrepreneurs learn this particular lesson. Let's take a look at that. So you start with who you are, what you know, and whom you know on day 1. You then ask yourself, what can I do? And then you start talking to people, interact with anybody and everybody. And every conversation is about getting commitments. It's not just advice and feedback, although nothing wrong with advice and feedback. So get commitments. Every time you get a commitment, you get some new means. That is a cycle that sets up. It becomes who we are, what we know. So this is an expanding cycle of resources and relationships. But most good people are not going to commit to working with you, and you will not commit to working with people who are not good enough either, because you always want to think about your version of their vision, and they want to think about their version of your vision. And that's how goal change becomes part of the process. But then this sets up a converging cycle on what we can and cannot do. So both these cycles start kicking in. Along the way comes the lemons from outside. That's okay. That'll hit our burden hand and our affordable laws. But the process itself, and you can walk away from this anytime. Quitting is always an option. But to the extent that the process keeps going, here is the bottom line, right? If success happens, innovation is built into the process, even if you do not intend to innovate at all. And if failure happens, the costs of failure are always going to be within the affordable loss of the stakeholders involved. So it's a very interesting thing that these expert entrepreneurs learn, and this is why they rabidly endorse some of these strategies that I spoke about. So, okay, so here, fingers crossed, technical people, get ready to help. I have a 1.45 second something, 1 minute and something video from Jensen Huang, because I want you to hear some of what I'm saying, and then we'll dive a little deeper into what he said, and then I will close the talk here. So let's try and play this.
It was an instant success. I think it went from $0 to $1 billion practically overnight. But then all of a sudden, AMD wanted to control all of the technology in the PC, and we wanted to stay independent, so they purchased ATI and no longer needed us. We turned to Intel and negotiated a license to connect to Intel CPUs. Apple was excited about what we were building and asked us to work on a new computer with them, which became the first MacBook Air. Well, Intel saw what happened and decided they didn't want us to do that anymore. And so they terminated our agreement. Well, we pivoted again. Our chip excited Google. They asked us to work on a new device, which turned out to have been the Android mobile device. Well, Qualcomm decided they didn't want us to do that. And so they didn't want us to connect to their modems, and it's hard to build a mobile device without being connected to a modem. And there were no other LTE modem companies. So we had to exit the mobile device market. Well, this happened practically on a year rhythm. And we would build something, it would be incredibly successful, generate enormous amounts of excitement, and then 1 year later, we were kicked out of those markets. Well, with no more markets to turn to, we decided to build something where we are sure there are no customers. Because one of the things you can guarantee is where there are no customers, there are also no competitors. And nobody cares about you. And so we chose a market with no customers, a $0 billion market, and it was robotics. This is over 10 years ago now. 10 years later, I can't be happier with what we've built.
So, what the heck does he mean? Oh, he's Jensen Huang. By the way, I am not endorsing the NVIDIA way or Jensen Huang and the way he expects employees to work or anything like that. I'm not using it as a role model. I just wanted to give you a glimpse into some of the lessons people learn the hard way that hopefully we can put to some use in the way we are proceeding. Especially here, the story of learning the hard way, that always being first to market or being, customers who are like leaders in market, that's not always the way to build a great company. So we want to take a look at what does that $0 billion market mean here? It means that markets are made. right? We think that markets are out there and we have to go and somehow fit in there, or we have to ride the wave or something like that. But this is a very different mindset, and a lot of these experienced entrepreneurs learn that the hard way after 10, 15 years of trying to do things, and some of them can be very successful even in the early stage, and then they still bite the dust again and again. In fact, take him, who wrote the NVIDIA way, literally calls this being tortured into greatness. That's how he describes the story of NVIDIA. And that's not far from the truth with a lot of company. So let's take a look at how markets are made, especially how these relationships matter. So in this particular thing, I want to urge everybody in the room here, if you're from a larger corporation and you think, oh my God, how do I work with these startups? I think we have to figure out ways to work together. As a corporation, you have to create the corridors. You can do X prizes. There are 1,000 different ways large companies can bring in startups. Why? As Prasanna says, everything is changing so fast. It's kind of crazy. If you go back to the 2x2 I showed you, and you're going to wait till your predictions don't work, and then you're going to decide on persistence or adapt, it's going to kill you along the way, right? So the idea here is you want to be building these corridors of partnering with younger companies, not trying to become young yourself. You know, I have to tell that to myself in the mirror every morning. And so the idea is you have to build the corridors and not just assume trust is a problem. These people are going to fail. They're not going to be around. We really want to take that seriously. So the idea is here, you want to think about targeted partnerships, but you also want to think about effectual partnerships, where you build corridors, ways for people to come in the door, and you can start thinking about how can we structure the relationship in spite of the trust issue, in spite of the possibility of failure rate. In fact, when we get together and work, the failure rate is not at all a problem. But from the entrepreneur's side, you also have to start thinking about how are you getting to know. It's not the idea of looking at somebody and trying to get a purchase order or get funding. You're always thinking about relationships and partnerships. And I'll talk about that and come to an end here. And the most important thing to remember here is when a relationship does happen, you have to structure it for endurance. What does that mean? For that, let's just go back to the cave and take a look at it here. The standard way a lot of us, if we are doing entrepreneurship for the first time, we look at it and say, I'm looking for a customer and I'm going to be the vendor. Especially a lot of technology startups, that's where they begin, and nothing wrong with that. But think about this as just the beginning. But even in that beginning, you actually want to have the attitude that what you're really looking for is a very strong, competent, committed stakeholder, and they will be partners in your business. So with my students, I always say your first customers, for some reason, they are your early adopters, right? Your first customers cannot just be customers. So first rule, when you say who is a customer, customer is someone who is willing and able to pay enough so that you can sustain the business long enough to build the next customer, right? So customer is not a random user, they're not likes, they're not eyeballs, they're not, that's the customer. And then the early customers have to be your number one salespeople as well. They have to call other people, otherwise they're not good enough, right? So from day one, you're looking not just for the purchase order and the check. You're really starting to think, how are they going to become part of your business? And then hopefully they become your investors and they become partners. Just to give you a quick number, about 70% of all companies that go public in the United States, which has the largest and most active VC market, have no formal outside investors, including VCs. Why? Because VCs fund 1/100th of 1% of all companies, and 9 out of 10 of those fail anyway. If you want to think about where are those 70% of the high-end, most successful entrepreneurs getting their funding from? Answers, anybody? Customers and vendors and every other kind of stakeholder. NVIDIA went under, almost went under. They used to have 1 week's worth of cash left, and customers routinely came in and invested in them. And then there were developers who would pre-order and things like that. And you can see this a lot. So when you're going in, and if you are a company, also you don't want to be thinking, here is just a vendor. These relationships are very important in a changing time because they then get you ready to deal with the unexpected. And then this is an even narrower view. I find this especially in places like India. I found that in some other countries as well. People are very, very individualistic in the way they think you want to do your own thing, your own way, and that's really the thing. And from day one in your relationship, you're already thinking, how am I going to divide the pie, whether it is with co-founders or with vendors or with customers, or you go the entire other route of being like a volunteer service. You don't want to get paid. You don't need to get paid at all. Neither of those things can work, right? So that may be down the road, that may be a useful strategy, but for the most part, it's not at all a useful strategy. Large corporations tend to worry a lot more about, are we getting value? Is this company going to be around? Am I taking a risk? What are the trust issues? Things like that. But usually, if you pitch them the idea that together you can increase the pie, that's the easier sell. If you're going to propose a partnership from day one, they're probably not listening, but we have to educate them into it in some way. And I'm working with people in larger companies to get them to build these corridors where some of these trials can happen with startups. But the effectual idea is really to think of all the early stakeholders as partners, as full partners as they can be, because they're not only going to help build your venture, together you are going to help build new markets. And that is the $0 billion market. So just to go back to some prescriptions, if you're starting a relationship, whether you are a larger company, or maybe there are 3 different entities involved or more, or whether you're a startup, you want to think about the downside and keep it within your control. So if you're going to place a bet on something, keep it under affordable loss, but always see the upside as something you can shape, not something that you have to target and hit the mark and get. Later on, it may be of some use to you, but if you're building the relationship, you really want to say, what is it that the two of us together can make that doesn't exist today and that maybe some other group cannot make, right? And then this is not about continuously pivoting and adapting, and it's not about persisting in a crazy, heroic fashion either. It's truly about focusing on the doable, which is the $0 billion market. So here comes my last slide. So in a $0 billion market, the search for more customers and fewer competitors is unnecessary. I'm making a tall claim. Think about this for a minute. Because competent, committed partners are sufficient to produce new markets. So I'm an academic, so I do want to end on a little bit of the philosophical thing. So let's go back to this thing that the entire left-hand triangle is the scientific approach, and it's truly about searching for necessary conditions, but we always know that they're usually never sufficient, right? But we work with that because the next set of hypotheses, the next bit of technology will get us closer to the truth. in some way. So it's a search for necessary conditions, and every once in a while somebody gets very lucky and finds a necessary and sufficient condition. The entrepreneurial method, the bottom blue triangle, is all about you just need enough. As I told you, you need a customer willing and able to pay enough. At that time, I made it feel, oh, they have to pay enough, otherwise they're not customer. But you can also see it as a sufficient condition. And every single company that exists, they will claim that they were necessary. No company is actually necessary. That's the heart of the free market system. But every company has done something with sufficiently good enough, right? But so that makes none of them actually necessary, but each one is sufficient. And so I want to leave you with that thought, kind of a philosophical thing, but if you want to talk about it, hopefully you will read some other stuff on the scientific and entrepreneurial method. So just let me leave you with that. I might have taken up a couple more minutes of your life. As I said, I probably owe a lot of people drinks anyway here. Looking forward to having a conversation after this. Thank you. Do we have time for a couple of questions? Because I really never do this. I always love it if it's so. At least maybe 2 questions, if you will indulge me. I think this is the longest non-conversational talk I've ever given, Prasanna. Don't you think?
So
okay.
With reference to...
Rajan has to pay for his question, right? Okay. For everybody else, it's free.
Yeah.
I
so
can't
with reference
see you,
to Hoodia-Pearl's causality, I think there's been a lot of modeling done around it. Today, I think there are even packages like the likes of DoY available to be able to computationally also use them in research. Is there an equivalent for CAVE or effectuation that is already present or you envision creating?
What is your name?
My name is Shruti.
Okay, you build it. I'll help you out. Right? And I'll introduce you to a whole bunch of people who are interested in building games, but there's no game. I mean, there are a whole bunch of like card games and other kinds of things that people use in teaching. And I'm asking the same question. Why don't we have, so if you will build it, you can count me in.
This is a question coming in as a researcher and a practitioner working with the startups. So happy to collaborate on this.
Absolutely. And I will also introduce you to a couple of really young computer science students doing AI who will probably help us build it as well. So happy to introduce you. Here we go. This is a successful talk if we have a commitment from the beginning of a partnership here. Yes? Does Simon have to pay? No? All right, Simon, go for it.
Okay. Hello. Is that working? Yes. Oh, super. So the word competition, competare, is the act of seeking with others. So I love your seeking resources, seeking relationships. And we normally talk about 3 different forms of competition. Fighting others, conflict. Working with others, collaboration. Helping others, cooperation. So when we look at an organization, we tend to be, we're in competition with others, we tend to be collaborating, cooperating, and conflicting with others all at the same time.
Yes.
And varying
And welcome
over
to
time.
marriage, too. Yeah.
So with your, causal to adaptive, I mean, they're not just, you're going to be one of those things. All of those things are going to be going on within an organization at the same time.
Correct.
Is that true? Oh, right.
Absolutely.
Well, that was a simple question to answer. It's just a simple yes.
No, that's
Thank
absolutely.
you.
The only difference is the role of predictive information in that. Do I target somebody to cooperate with? Especially from a strategy perspective, or am I open to collaborators walking in the door or asking for it? So the non-predictive part is the only addition here in the bottom right. Right? Whether there is competition, the role of, for example, do effectual entrepreneurs compete? Absolutely. But they also have no problem partnering with their competitors. And in the startup stage, I actually encourage my students to start by trying to create a relationship with a potential competitor. Why? Because they will acquire you down the road. But you will be surprised. Your point about all of them are interconnected and will go on. And in some cases, some may get overemphasized or whatever, but all of that goes on is correct. But the key here is you can do that predictively. You can do that as a control-based strategy. So that's really the point of the CAVE framework. Does that help? I know it's a longer answer than you needed. All right.
Hi, ma'am. Thank you for this session. I'm Amit Srivastava. I have a company, Constance AI, and we are in Vision AI. So we do visual AI. Now, the last slide, which you talked about, partners, which is creating new market.
Yes.
And I kind of look like I can relate with it, and that's what I will be talking to you after this. We deal with enterprises. We went with a product, and then after some time, we were building something which is kind of pivoted, but that become our main product as of today. And will that qualify? I mean, that is what this means?
Okay, good question. Excellent question. The pivoting question is one I get, a lot of people get confused by. So the question is, when you pivoted, what was the basis on which you decided to pivot, and what was the basis on which you decided to pivot to whatever?
Sure. So we are predominantly tech people, and when we went to our customer, we thought we understood the retail. Retail is our area. And as we got deeper into it, we realized we know tech, but we don't know retail.
So is this a customer, the way I defined it, they were already paying you?
Yes.
Yes? Okay,
Yes.
so real customer, okay.
Real
Keep
customer.
going.
And they said, okay, this is my problem. And we started building towards that. And then we realized that this is a whole new world. And they are not the only customer. There are people around it who want it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The only other wrinkle I would put on it is get them to pay for the pivot. Because they want you to change, right?
Yeah.
And if you can do that, they have more skin in the game. They are more likely to want you to succeed. And you can go back to them and say, call your competitors. We'd like to sell it to them too. So that's the only addition I will do. Otherwise, you are absolutely doing the effectual pivot. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good.